Before I introduce our wonderful guest, I would like to give a few words about the two organizations co-sponsoring this event. First, there's AEI on Campus. This is a new initiative of the American Enterprise Institute, started last semester with a new chapter here at Yale. Has a mission of liberty, of individual opportunity, free enterprise, and public policy. Our first guest last semester was Katie Zimmerman, who gave a talk about foreign policy. She's a recent Yale alum. The second organization, the Buckley program, we have the mission of promoting intellectual diversity here on campus. We do that through a number of ways, through our speaker series, of course, through our seminars, and through our firing line debates. We also have internship opportunities. If anyone is still looking for internship opportunities for this summer, both AEI and the Buckley program have a lot of information up here. There's other AEI information as well. Feel free to sign up for either one of these groups. But without further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Brooks. He is the president of the American Enterprise Institute, a nonpartisan think tank in Washington, D.C. Before that, he still is a scholar in economics. He writes regularly for the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. His recent book, Road to Freedom, is a New York Times bestseller. There's some pamphlets here about that. And you may have caught him recently do an entire interview in Spanish. Really impressive. Without further ado, he'll be speaking on the secret to happiness.
Thanks. So we run a think tank in Washington, D.C. What's that? A think tank, for those of you who don't know, most of you do, but some of you who don't, a think tank is like a university without students. It's an educational, scholarly organization where 206 full-time professionals working on public policy issues, dedicated largely to economics, foreign policy, health policy, education. We don't do much on traditional social policy. And we do this work with very little classroom teaching. We're mostly doing the research side of what a research university would be doing. The mission of the place is to bolster a society that maximizes human liberty, increases individual opportunity, and fights for free enterprise to give more people a better life. And I'm going to tell you what I mean by that, and I'm not going to ask that everybody even agree with any points of view that I put forward today, but I'm going to try to change maybe the way that you think about the free enterprise system a little bit, because I've changed the way that I think about the free enterprise system a little bit. And I'm looking forward to your feedback as well. I came to AEI from, as I told you, from Syracuse, where I was a professor for a long time. Before that, I was at a think tank called the RAND Corporation. And before that, I was a professional musician. So I spent 12 years making my living as a French horn player. I played in the Barcelona Symphony for a long time. I was playing chamber music and playing jazz with a guitar player named Charlie Bird. I had kind of a weird and windy and non-traditional path to where I am today. And it informed some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. So more on that in a second. At AEI and the research that we do, where we're talking to policymakers and publishing op-eds and books, et cetera, it's pretty easy for us to lose sight of what matters. When you're dealing in public policy, you start to think, what matters is a well-functioning economy, good public policy, et cetera. But when you talk to people about what they really care about, nobody ever says, you know, a good and equitable corporate tax rate. That's what I really care about. Nobody says, I mean, they want that, apparently, but it doesn't jump to the front of their mind. When you think about what motivates you, what could make your life better today, if I gave you a little sodium pentothal and you told me the truth, you would tell me, I know what you'd tell me because I have a lot of anonymous survey data on what people really want. You'd tell me that you want to be happy. This is what people want. Now, I suppose that we should all want to be better people and serving others more, and they're all noble goals that we should want more, but the truth of the matter is when you take everything away, that's what people really want, is to be happy. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And then later I'm going to talk a little bit more about public policy. Okay, now, this is a subject that I've looked at for quite a long time, including when I was teaching economics at Syracuse, mostly because I like to do research on what people actually care about and what matters to them. And I'm going to tell you some of the things that I've found over the years and what I think it should matter to all of us. Now, to begin with, the first question that you ask when you're an economist is who's happy and can you measure it? And this is actually kind of interesting. There's a lot of research on the subject of human happiness. It goes back about 4 decades. And most economists and psychologists are pretty convinced that you can measure happiness, and you can measure happiness pretty accurately. I didn't believe that at first, but I read, 200 articles and books, mostly so, you don't have to, and I can describe those things to you right now. And what you find is that the measurements of happiness are really good. There's some complicated measures where, you put people in MRI machines and you look what part of their brains illuminate when they're expressing different emotions, et cetera. But you can do it a lot more simply than that by asking large groups of people pretty well-designed questions anonymously. Okay? One of the questions you'll ask is, all things considered, given the good and bad things that are going on in your life, how happy are you in this period in your life? You want to know right now, because people will tell you whether they're up or down at this particular moment. At this period in your life, all things considered, how happy are you about your life? And then look at that over a period of time, and what you find is it's really stable, and you get some predictable reactions. Okay? People tend to not lie about that. We have ways of figuring that one out too. And what do you find? If I did a test on all of you, and I say, I'm going to give you 3 choices. Very happy, somewhat happy, not too happy in this period in your life, I'd find that 1/3 of you are very happy. About 50 to 55% of you are pretty happy, somewhat happy, and 10 to 15% of you would be not happy. Okay? Now, I'm not going to ask you to do that because some of you would have to vote for not too happy, and that's not something that you're well, very happy about, and you don't want to put up your hands to talk about it right now. But that's what we'd find, and I know that because I've looked at large groups of people across lots and lots of years, and that's stable, going all the way back to the early 1970s. It's actually quite an amazing thing. So that's not the interesting question, who's happy and how you measure it, it turns out. The interesting question is, what's the difference between happy and unhappy people? What are the patterns in their lives? That's what you want to find out. Because once you find out certain people are predictably happy and other people not so much, and furthermore, that it doesn't break down very well with respect to race and money, which is true, then you want to know how people are living their lives and see the patterns. That's when it gets really interesting. So the question is, what causes it? Now, you've got to look through a huge amount of research by economists and psychologists and brain scientists and sociologists and all kinds of people in different fields. But here's what you find. What causes happiness? The answer is 3 things bring happiness. This is going to be news you can use. You're going to leave today and you're going to do a bunch of things to make you a happier person. Right? This I guarantee you, or your money refunded. As far as I can tell, none of you paid for this lecture, so there you are. 3 things cause happiness. Your genetics, life events, and your beliefs and habits. Okay? And I'm going to talk to you about each one of these things. Right? I'm going to leave beliefs and habits for last because that's the stuff you can control the most. And that's going to give you a lot of power when I talk about that. Okay, so let's start by talking about genetics. Now, I never wanted to believe that happiness had any genetic component to it at all. Right? As an American, I come from this hearty stock of immigrants that control everything, right? I'm going to leave my country and I'm going to come to that country where I don't speak the language and don't know anybody and nobody's the same religion because I think I can completely redesign my life. That's the ethos that a lot of Americans kind of have. So if you find that a big part of your personality is somehow genetic, that's disempowering and I don't like it on its face. But there's a body of literature that's been developing at the University of Minnesota that looks at a big database of twins. Now, twins are interesting, right? They have a lot of similarities, especially identical twins who are essentially genetic carbon copies of each other. Geneticists kind of argue about that. But they're effectively the same in their DNA, okay? Now, of the twin database at the University of Minnesota, 75 pairs of twins born between 1936 and 1955 were separated at birth and adopted to separate families. Now, for a social scientist like me, that's like a dream come true because I can separate out statistically nature from nurture if I know something about their adult personalities. I know the difference in the way that they were raised, and I know their identical genes, and I can say, aha, this part of how they vary is genetic, and this part is according to their environment. Okay, so we have these data, and what do you find? We find that much more of our personalities than we ever thought possible is actually genetic. I didn't want to find. So, for example, how much of how you vote is genetic? Huh? The answer is 40%. 40%. Okay, 60% comes from your experiences and your own free will, but 40% is a gift from your parents. Your crazy voting patterns, incidentally, will get crazy like your parents, generally speaking, by the time you reach about age 40. You become more and more like your parents. That's, you know, bad news for a lot of you. How much of how religious you are is genetic? Answer is 40%. There's a number that's starting to coalesce, we're starting to coalesce around here. A bigger part, more than half of your neuroticism, your tendency toward alcoholism, your extroversion, certain parts of criminal behavior, you find a lot of that stuff has a big genetic component. And happiness. Okay. Your baseline mood, the mood that you always go back to and you get into your rut. You know, you're always your foul mood, no matter how good things are, you always go back to it. Or if you're a cheerful person, which is probably pretty annoying, your cheerfulness always goes back to that level no matter how bad things have been in the recent past. Okay. How much of that is genetic? And the answer is, depending on which study you look at, something like 48%. Now that's artificially precise, somewhere between 40 and 60%. But this is a number that the statisticians come up with pretty frequently. 48%. 48% of your happiness is a gift from your parents, right? Your mother did make you unhappy, literally, in other words. Physically wired it right into you. It's and when you know people who are really good-natured all the time, they don't have a special secret, actually. They're born that way. They hit it right in the parent lottery, is what it comes down to. You know, happy parents, generally speaking, have happy kids. Gloomy parents have gloomy kids. Okay, now, why is that empowering? It's empowering because if you're on the gloomy side, you need to own that and take as much ownership as you can of the 52% that's remaining. Okay? That's really important. I learned that, incidentally, sort of in a roundabout way. I have this friend that I was teaching with, and we were the same age, and he went to the doctor one day, and the doctor gave him this terrible but weird news that he had about 15 years left to live, okay? We were in our early 30s at that point, okay? We were both newly out of graduate school, and he had something like 15 years left to live. Now, if you hear you have 15 years left to live, what do? You're not going to go mope around and, you know, watch TV and feel all depressed. You're probably going to do what my friend did. She said, I thought I was going to have 45 or 50 years left, but I'm going to have 15 years left. So I'm going to take 45 years of life and I'm going to stuff it into 15 years. I'm going to be a better husband and a better father and a better citizen and a better professor, and I'm going to be a more joyful person. I'm going to take all that happiness from my last 45 years and put it into 15. I bet you'd come up with that conclusion too. And he did. Started living completely differently. It was extraordinary. You'd think that's something that you'd resolve to do and then you would lose that resolution. He didn't. You know, he travels more. He and his wife had a couple more kids. You know, the things that they felt that would create more joy in their lives and joy in the lives of other people. And it's sort of an extraordinary thing. And he really is much happier as a result of that. You really can change your life. Now, what does that tell me? What lesson did I get from that? If you've only got half of your happiness to work with, stuff 100% of your happiness into that little can, okay? Use it to the max. Don't waste any of it by making wrong decisions. So genetics are about half of your happiness. Now, there are other innate characteristics that matter. One of them that people they look at a lot, but they don't study very much because it's kind of controversial, is gender, okay? Now, are men or women happier? A lot of researchers look at this. Economists look at this the most because economists are not very sensitive to gender issues or any other issues for that matter. And so they'll say, oh, okay, let's happen across it, et cetera. But they're not very well equipped to explain the patterns that they see. So I have a sociology professor in the back, and you know perfectly what I'm talking about. Sociologists actually can explain things where an economist can estimate them. And what you find is that they see these big patterns. So who's happier, men or women? What do you think? Yeah. Well, I've heard both, men and women. That's more or less exhaust the possibilities. And women, generally speaking, are happier than men. And some of these relationships have been changing over the years. But typically what you find is that single men and women are, these days, equally happy or unhappy, how you want to look at it. Traditionally, single women have been happier than single men. Married women are happier than married men. Widowed women are way happier than widowed men. Like, way, way happier than widowed men. Like, funny. And it's like, It doesn't make sense. Anyway, my wife got that one immediately. No kidding. So the only group is divorced women who are unhappier than divorced men typically. And there's actually a reason for that, which is that divorced women have a lot more pressure typically if they have kids in the home than divorced men. Working and taking care of kids is a highly pressure-filled life. And so there's an explanation for that that we see from the environment, okay? But just in general, you find the pattern that women are happier than men. But that happiness advantage has been decreasing over the past 40 years consistently. A friend of mine is a guy who his name is Justin Wolfers. He's an economist who studies happiness, has found that the curves have actually even crossed and women have become unhappier than men recently. So the interesting question that I'm going to leave to you, because nobody wants to touch this with a 10-foot pole, is why has the happiness gap that women have traditionally enjoyed converged to the average level of unhappiness of men over the past 40 years? Women have been getting slowly unhappier, almost as unhappy as men. Men haven't been getting better off. This is one of the patterns that we're seeing. But there are innate, and I'll leave that to you, but there are innate differences that we see that are not just genetic, is the bottom line. Okay, so we've accounted for half of your happiness. Your parents, a few other things. Now, here's what you think is going to make you happy, and this is number 2, which is life events. You think that if, you've been told since you were a little kid to set your goals and achieve them, right? If you just hit your goals, then you're going to have a great life, right? We're very goal-oriented creatures by nature, but our culture, our society tells us to have these big, audacious goals and to try to hit them, and then everything will be okay. So what percentage of your happiness at any particular time has to do with life events and goals that you're meeting or missing? And the answer is 40%, about 40%, which is a lot. So 40% is actually coming from your life circumstances and your goal attainment, which suggests, and incidentally, that's not just hitting your goals, not getting that big job or that big raise or getting sick, which is kind of an opposite of a goal. It's also the little things that are happening at any particular time. You get a really nasty email from one of your professors, and it really brings you down. You're feeling horrible. You flunked an exam, which I did a lot. And so I remember that feeling where for a whole day you're kind of dragging along. It's no good. But, you know, you think to yourself, how long does that last? How long does that last? And the answer is not very long at all. The reason that 40% that comes from goal attainment and from your average circumstances, the reason that is not very important actually is because, number one, the way that your goals work and your circumstances work, they don't affect you as the way that you think they're going to, and they never last. If you in the workplace, when you double somebody's salary, you find that affects their happiness for about 3 months, okay? The day they're happiest about doubling their salary is the day they find out about it, not the day it shows up in their check. It's a really weird thing, although we're going to discuss that in just a minute, right? So what you find is if you get a new house, maximum 6 months. There aren't very many big, audacious goals that affect you for very long at all. Weather is an interesting one. People move for weather and move to a really nice place. They move to California, right? They move to California. He's from California. He's from LA, which is a nice place. I mean, the weather's nice. Culture, not so much. But when you're in California, you think, boy, I would just be happy all the time if I lived here. Weather wears off in 6 months unless you have seasonal affective disorder. 6 months. Don't do it is the bottom line, because 6 months is not worth the differential in the house price, not to mention the job market, unless that's the place where you want to go. Okay, so basically, you have a situation in which you have these life events. Now, I'm going to tell you about a study that really is going to bring this home to you, okay? And this is a famous study that some of you have heard of from Northwestern from 1978. It's an ancient study by social science standards, but it's such a profound study that it endures and people still talk about it a lot. And that's a study of paraplegics and lottery winners. Ever heard of the paraplegics and lottery winners study? Okay, so what did the researchers do? They looked at a group, not a sizable group, but a decent-sized group of people who had lost their mobility in an accident and people who had hit the lottery, major Powerball lottery winners. And they looked at what their level of happiness was before the event, and they looked at the level of happiness and their enjoyment of everyday experiences was 6 months after the event, good or bad event. Okay, so what did they find? Number one, they found that the paraplegics actually were as almost as happy 6 months after their accident as they were before they had their accidents. So their happiness went way down, and then it came up almost, in terms of enjoying their day-to-day lives, almost as much as before their accidents. Now, would they do anything to get their mobility back? Probably. But what we find out is their happiness was not defined by their mobility. It was something deeper about who they were as people. And you'd expect that, incidentally, given the fact that 48% of your happiness is genetic. And you go back into particular grooves. Okay? Now, it's going to be explained by a couple of other things here, too. More depressing, because that's actually kind of uplifting, more depressing is the lottery winners example. Okay? You look at the lottery winners, and you want to know how happy you'd be if you hit the lottery. So I went around the room and I said, if you hit the lottery, what would you do? Right? I bet not one of you would say something bad. Right? You'd say, I'd live closer to my family. I'd complete my education without debt, which would be great. So I could start off without any debt when I finished. I would, you see people who are in the workforce typically that say, I would, write that book. I would go back and continue my education. When men are trying to impress women, they usually say, I'd start a foundation, No, you wouldn't. And, but here's what none of you would say if we were going around the room. You hit the lottery, what would you do? Right? None of you would say, I would start by buying a bunch of junk I don't want to need, and then I would get involved in a romantic relationship with somebody who doesn't love me and who's only using me for my money, and that ends in misery. And that number 3 is I start a nasty, nasty alcoholic spiral. Right? That's what happens. That's what happens. And you've heard the anecdotes, but I've got the data. And it's true. People's lives get really, really weird and bad after they hit the lottery. You look at the data. It shows that 6 months after people hit the lottery, they're permanently, day to day, a little unhappier than they were, permanently, than they were the day before they won. Weird, right? Now, why? Why is that? Is it because of these terrible relationships and alcoholic things that happen to them? The answer is no. Those things are actually a symptom of the real problem. When you hit the lottery, what happens typically is that a lot of things change and you don't enjoy the little things in your life anymore. Okay? So let's think about what you're looking forward to this coming weekend. Okay? You're going to have something fun. You're going to do something fun. And I can tell you right now that you'd tell me and it would sound really boring to everybody else. Because you're going to hang out with your friends, you're going to go to the movies, you're going to go out to dinner, you're going to go shoot pool, you're going to call somebody on the phone, you're going to have a good time in these little mundane, everyday things, because that's the life in life. The life in life is not something big. The life in life is something little that you're going to enjoy and always involves relationships with other people. Virtually always. Now that's a big deal because that's exactly what changes when you get overnight rich in something you didn't earn. When you hit the lottery, your friend groups change, you buy lots and lots of stuff, but very quickly that wears off, the enjoyment from that wears off. You don't have any of your old friends anymore. People treat you differently, and what happens from that is that people react to it in very unproductive and destructive ways. They buy more and more things trying to get full flavor, which they don't. They get involved in romantic relationships which are entirely inappropriate. And they use drugs and alcohol in abusive ways. That's the reason. I mean, that's actually a causal, the other direction from the fact that their life just doesn't have as much meaning anymore. Now, a couple of things to take away from this. Number one, going for these big goals as if they would bring you permanent happiness is an exercise in futility, number one. Number two, never, never, never take anything that's not earned. Okay, if you can avoid it. Now, we all have things that aren't earned that are given to us as gifts, and that's wonderful. But the idea of having goals to get stuff that's not earned, bad idea for your happiness. It goes against the way people are wired for their own happiness. Okay, now let me back up here for a second and talk about one issue that's going to come up here in just a minute. Okay, we were talking about men and women. I was talking about men and women. You were listening when I was talking about men and women just a second ago, but you're going to be asking questions about this in a minute. So I want to talk about one related issue. It's related to gender. It's related to life events. It's related to expectations. And that is when men are unhappy. Okay, now, what you find over the course of life is that women don't have big peaks and valleys over the course of their lives. They have some, but not that many. But men have a great big valley in part of their lives where they tend to be unhappy. Okay? The average unhappiest age in a man's life. And this is really clear. I've been seeing this in the data for a long time. I've crunched the numbers myself, and I've calculated the average age. So question for you, what is the average unhappiest age in a man's life? Right? Say men because women don't see this, at least not as pronounced a way as men do. So what's the average unhappiest age in a man's life? What do you think? 40, yeah. That's 40, 50, 25, yeah. It's like you know some 25-year-old guys, don't you? That's right. Somebody said 50 as a 50-year-old dad. 45, 45. So we're in there, okay? 45 is in this zone. And incidentally, it's creeping up as the male midlife crisis is happening later because the maturation of the American male tends to be getting later too. I mean, you can, okay, I mean, you can stay on your parents' insurance till you're like, you know, 68 now or something, I don't know. It's like, thanks to Obamacare. So, so 45 is when you find men are the most depressed about their lives. And so you got to ask yourself, why do you find this pattern in the data? Right? So I ask a sociologist, I'm going to predict, she's going to say, that's when the relationships that you have in your life are most likely to be going haywire. That's when people are most likely to have gotten divorced if they're going to get divorced. That's when they're most likely to have their children turn into teenagers. And I got teenagers, and let me tell you, it's super fun. And it's all these explanations, which are really meritorious, but there's got to be more to it. So I went and looked at the data. And what you find is that it's not all 45-year-old guys that are bringing down the average. No, it's a sizable minority, like a quarter, that are bringing down the average. Most guys are actually kind of okay. But okay. But a quarter of these guys are just, incidentally, how many of you guys are under 45? Solidarity for those of us that aren't. You guys are just totally on your way down. So, and you know, you got something to look forward to, and I'm gloating right now. 45 is what's going on with this quarter of guys that are really positively having a hard time at this point. And the answer is basically something like this. It's an economic explanation. When you're in your 20s and 30s, which most of you are, 20s, life is not easy, but it's conceptually simple. You want to do better in life? You want to be happier? You want to be more successful, more prosperous? Hit the gas on your career. Make more money, get more promotions, get a better job, move if you need to move. It's actually conceptually pretty simple. Incidentally, it's also conceptually pretty simple for women who are on the same kind of career tracks. Just go forward, but faster. Okay, now, the problem is guys get into their mid-40s and they say, I don't like this road I'm on. I've been going faster and faster and faster down this road, but I'm on the wrong road. I mean, it's a kind of a fundamental error. I want to be someplace else. I want to be on a road that it's of my own design. I want to be over on that little dirt trail that I found myself, okay? And they want to design their own lives, and they feel that they've been tracked into something about which they're not very passionate. Right? That's an old story, of course, and that's not really where I'm going. Here's the real question. What's on the little road for the guys who found the one that they wanted? What's on it? Because if I can tell you that, I can give you some actual advice, okay? So, I've looked at people who are on their own little road, right, over the course of my research. And you can find some things about them. Those that didn't go faster and faster and faster and faster and then get into a big accident when they were 45. What do we know about them? Okay, well, to begin with, I'm one of those guys on the little dirt road. How did it happen? Pure accident. Pure accident. I wasn't so wise. I said, I'm going to pursue my own individual passion and be my own man. No, 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 no. I accidentally fell off the superhighway. How did it happen? When I was your age, those of you who were students, when I was actually 19, I dropped out of college, okay? Or, dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And, I was encouraged to pursue other things by the school. And I went off on my own to be a professional musician. I didn't make it back to college. I didn't graduate until I was 30. okay? So I was out of college for, my parents called it my gap decade, right? And I was out of college for a long time and doing my thing. I mean, it was kind of cool. I mean, I was traveling around. I've been in all 50 states, playing music in all 50 states. And I saw a lot of things, and I played a lot of the music that I really loved. By the end, I was in the Barcelona Symphony, which is a wonderful place, playing some of the greatest repertoire ever. And I came to the conclusion that this wasn't what I wanted to do forever. I came to the conclusion that I probably wasn't, I was on the right road then, but I wasn't going to be on the right road later. And the reason I figured that out is because I was working with a lot of guys who were 20 years older than me, and they weren't very happy. They were bothered by the fact that they hadn't gone as far as they wanted in their chosen career, but more than anything else, they were bored. And they had a lot of pathologies in their lives that indicated a lot of unhappiness. And I thought to myself, it's good right now, but not going to be so good later. So I think I'm going to hatch a plan to do something else. This has been great. Now let's do something else, right? So I figured out that if I was going to do anything at all that I wanted to do, I had to go to college. Inconvenient, but I had to get it done. So I figured out how I could get a college degree by correspondence. And I did. I went to college. I got a correspondence school degree. Fortunately, it had more of a traditional graduate school experience that gave me a slightly better education, but it was a wonderful opportunity. So I could, and I was doing that. I called my dad and I said, I was living in Barcelona. My dad was in Seattle where I grew up. And I said, I got these big news. I'm going to quit music. And he was just incredulous. He said, what are you talking about? He said, you've started a family. I was married by this point. He said, you can't do that. You can't just quit. Who quits? And I said, Dad, I don't think I'm going to be happy. I don't think I'm going to be happy with my job. He said, what makes you so special? Nobody's happy in his job, right? Generational differences, that's all I can say. I mean, there's this concept that it doesn't really matter. I mean, you just work and you're on a track. And I realized that he had never gotten off his own superhighway, and I had gotten lucky. Now, here's the question that we need to answer. How do you do that proactively? How do you find your little road without doing it by accident like I did? And not turning into the 45-year-old man and increasingly the 45-year-old women who have not done it. And that's where we want to go. So, 48% is genetic. 40% is life events. That leaves, if you're counting, if you're a math major, that's 12% left. You got 12% left. And that 12%, here's the best news, is controllable. That's under your absolute control because it has to do with your life decisions. It has to do with your values. It has to do with how you conduct yourself and what you consider to be important with respect to what you emphasize in your life. And best of all, I'm going to tell you how to do it, and if you do these things, you're going to give yourself a better shot at getting the 40% before, because what you need for the 40% of life events to be as good as possible is to have a lifestyle that brings you good luck, and to have a lifestyle that avoids as much bad luck as possible. So this is going to be 12% in your hands and a good shot at getting more of the 40. This is power I'm going to give you right now. You need to be paying attention every day to 4 things, okay? These 4 things are what, now what I recommend is that you put these 4 things on your list, your to-do list. Now, to do something in these 4 baskets tomorrow, and then put all the other stuff that you were going to do underneath it, and then cross out everything except these 4 things. That's how important these things are, these 4 things for you to think about, okay? Every day, you need to think about faith, family, community, and work. Now, that's not as arch or severe as it sounds, okay? It's not as severe as it sounds. I'm going to tell you which faith. I have one. Maybe some of you do too. All I'm talking about is the exploration of your transcendental life, of your interior life, of your views of something that's more than the here and now. You've never, ever heard of somebody on his or her deathbed saying, if I could do it all over again, I would just skip that whole spiritual journey thing. You know, nobody ever says that. And there's a reason for that, because that's what people wish they had spent more time doing, and there's a reason for that too. That brings a lot of understanding of oneself and enduring joy. Now, that's not a theological assertion. That's not a philosophical assertion. That's an empirical assertion based on what we know about people who have lives filled with patterns that lead to happiness. Okay? You decide on the faith itself, and faith is just a placeholder for the exploration of your interior life. The second is family, and family relationships, these are pretty straightforward. Family relationships are just what they sound like. Community is less straightforward than that. Community is a little bit more complicated because it has two parts to it. Number one of community is charitable behavior, voluntarism, and giving back. That's community. The other part is friendships, is really enduring friendships. And there's this bigger and bigger literature on friendship, which is so interesting. There's actually a guy, he's a psychologist at the University of Chicago named John Jacopo. You know John Jacopo? And he's the world's leading expert on loneliness. And he does this really interesting stuff. What do you find is that, one of the biggest problems you have with men who are over 60 is loneliness. Why? Because they've forgotten how to cultivate friendships. Men are bad at friendships, and they get worse and worse at friendships over the course of their life. You're really good at it when you're in college. You're really terrible at it by the time you go to live in, Del Boca Vista. That's when you get really bad at it. Why? Because over the course of your professional life, you have colleague relationships, but you get worse and worse and worse at real friend relationships. A lot of time, women are much better at friend relationships, and they get better at it over the course of your life. Friendships are an acquired skill, and they require that you practice them. Learning how to be a good friend. Okay, here's an interesting stat that is telling that I've seen on this subject. What percentage of 60-year-old men say their best friend is their wife? What percentage of 60-year-old men say, my best friend is my wife? 60%. What percentage of their wives say, my best friend is my husband? 30%. 30%. That's really depressing. That's the story of unrequited friendship, right? And so guys, you got a lot of friends now. Make sure that you cultivate these friendships all throughout your life. That's a very important part of element 3, which is community. Make sure you give back, and make sure that you give back friendship as much as anything else. The last is the one I want to spend the rest of my time on, which is work. Okay? Work we think of as something punitive and unpleasant a lot, but you know that's not true. You in your heart know that productive work is a really wonderful and joy-filled thing. Not every day, not every minute, of course. But in general, you're looking forward to what you get to do after you graduate from college. You're looking forward to that job because you know in your heart it's not going to be a drag at all. It's going to be really fun and really fulfilling and really rewarding and really interesting. Now, the truth of the matter is most people think they like their jobs, but other people don't like theirs. Get a number in your head right now of the percentage of Americans who like or love their jobs. Percentage of American adults who like or love their jobs. Okay, you got a number? It's wrong. The number is 89%. 89% of Americans either are satisfied or very satisfied with their jobs, according to the General Social Survey, which is the gold standard social database that we get from the University of Chicago. 89%. And I've looked at this with respect and holding everything constant, which you find that people above or below average income, insignificant statistically. People who have a college degree or who don't have a college degree, statistically insignificant. If you ask people, if you won the lottery right now or became independently wealthy, would you quit your current job? People who are below the median income are less likely to say that than people who are upper income, interestingly. And what does this tell us? The person who made your sandwich today at lunch loves her job, probably loves her job. Your mailman probably loves his job. And this is a beautiful thing. We have a tendency to think in the world of high education, sophistication, that we're the lucky ones who like our jobs and everything else is a dead-end job. I don't come from a background that has tons and tons and tons of higher education. My parents are pretty educated, but nobody else around us was, right? So I shouldn't be an elitist on this. I should not be an elitist on this. But one time, it's a true story, I was talking to a guy once who is the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of a company that owns 750 Burger Kings. Okay? I was sitting next to him on a plane. If any of you had the bad luck of sitting next to me on a plane and the bad judgment to start talking to me, I would start interviewing you about what you do for a living. Because as an economist, I think that's incredibly interesting what people do all day. I'll say, and then what do you do? And then after lunch, what do you do? And that's what I'd be asking you. And so I'm asking this guy, what he does for a living. It's like 750 Burger Kings. No kidding. That's just so interesting. And he says, nobody's ever said that to me before. And then I made the mistake. I did this elitist higher ed deal. I was a professor at this point, you know, smart guy with a PhD. I said, you ever feel bad about creating a lot of dead-end jobs? And he gets all red, and I think, oh, brother, I screwed it up. I screwed it up. It's like 2 hours left on the flight, too. And you know, he's getting really mad. I could tell he's angry with me. And he said, there are no dead-end jobs. I said, sorry. He says, everybody in the management of this corporation started by flipping burgers. And I said, yeah, but I just mean, he says, I know what you mean. He said, you know what a dead-end job is? It's somebody who comes into an organization and doesn't show up for work on time, or comes in high, or doesn't show up at all. That's what a dead end is all about. But if you work in a Burger King, he told me, I didn't know. He says, if you work in a Burger King and you come every day on time and do a good job for 6 months, you'll be an assistant manager. Within 4 years, you'll be managing a store. Within 6 years, you'll be making $100,000 a year or more. I said, really? He said, yeah, really. So get your facts straight. I said, you know, peace. Interesting to me. The point of the matter is, even people who have these supposed dead-end jobs for sophisticated, fancy people like us are not in dead-end jobs. They probably like those jobs. And those jobs probably do provide a lot of opportunity if approached in the right way. Now, there's public policy implications to this. I mean, some of you may join me in thinking that everybody deserves to be able to support themselves in some way. And probably as a community, we might have ways to help them do that. But the job itself has dignity and is a source of enduring happiness. How come? Is it because of money? I had 4 things on my list: faith, family, community, and work. I didn't have money on the list. Didn't have it on the list. How come? It's because money doesn't buy happiness. That's the reason. Now, actually, that's wrong. Back up. For poor people, really poor people, money does buy happiness because it relieves everyday pressures that those of us in this room, don't face. Preventable diseases, actual hunger, but up to the level of subsistence, maybe a little bit above the lower middle class levels, you can get extra happiness. We find this in a lot of data when people have more money. But above that, it's flat. Almost no happiness comes after that. So above about $25,000 for a family of 4, no extra happiness. Interesting, right? So why do we go after it so much? Money's not on the list. Why does work bring enduring joy to most people? The answer is because of the value we create, not the money we bring in. The answer is because of earned success. Earned success is the belief that you're creating value with your life and value in the lives of other people. People who say that they have earned their success are the happiest people. And I'm not talking about earning money again. I studied social entrepreneurship. I read a textbook called Social Entrepreneurship at one point in my career. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of these people who are nonprofit, startup, do-gooder types, right? People who run nonprofit organizations like I do today. And let me tell you, they're living on tap water and ramen noodles, a lot of them, and they're every bit as happy as anybody else who starts up an organization, an entrepreneur in more commercial terms. It's not about money at all. This earned success thing is something more transcendental, more amorphous, more powerful at the same time than anything as earthbound as money. I have data from the General Social Survey. Take 2 people who are exactly the same. Same age, sex, race, religion, same town of origin, same level of education. And they both believe that they have earned their success, but one earns 8 times as much money as the second. They're equally likely to say that they are very happy about their lives. Money doesn't buy happiness. Earned success brings happiness. And the opposite brings misery. The opposite is something psychologists call learned helplessness. I didn't make that one up. We made up earned success looking at the data. Learned helplessness comes from Marty Seligman, who's a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania. Brilliant. Done foundational work on happiness. He's done work that shows that when people have the rewards that they have earned taken away from them, or they are given rewards that they did not earn, experience learned helplessness, where they give up, become depressed, and they reject whatever activity is that they're engaged in. In other words, it's the path to misery. You can earn your success, or you can learn your helplessness. Now, of course, if you want more earned success for more people, you got to have a system that actually makes it possible for the most of us. A system that helps us to earn our success and helps most people to avoid learned helplessness. That's a system, of course, that matches people's skills with their passions. You want to get them on that little dirt road, right? Because earned success, that's the secret to getting on their little dirt road. If I want any of you to earn your success, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, what do you love? What are you good at? How can we put those things together for that magic conjunction that'll lead you to an earned success environment and give you the best shot, this moral good shot at happiness? You got to have a system that allows people to match their skills with their passions. It doesn't say, you're from a family of letter carriers or sheep herders. That's what you're going to do. No, no, no. You can't hold people back. You got to give people liberty to understand that and to explore themselves. You got to have a system that rewards hard work and innovation and personal responsibility. You got to have a system that celebrates success, that celebrates earned success. Doesn't matter if it's denominated in money or saving souls or cleaning up the environment. Earned success has to be celebrated. And there is a system that exists. That's the free enterprise system that my institution is dedicated to. This is where it gets really good, because we actually have a system that works while we sleep to make you happier and that we can share with other people. Now, this is not just about your happiness, right? This is also about survival. So I want to talk just for a second about poverty. Right now, what I'm writing a book on right now is poverty. And it's something I've been dedicated to looking at and thinking about in the United States and around the world for most of my career. This is this big new book project I've got going on, a huge project for AEI. We're hiring poverty scholars right now. So what do we know about how poverty has changed in my lifetime? When I was a kid, when I was a little kid, really little kid, 1970, what was poverty? Poverty was a picture in the National Geographic of a kid with flies on his face and a distended belly. And there was nothing I could do about it except put a couple of pennies in the cup and offer up a bunch of prayers. That was it. There was nothing anybody really could do about it when I was a kid. Now, what's it look like today? What's the difference between the world when I was a little kid and, say, 2014? The answer is that the percentage of the world's population, this is one measure, okay, just a measure, the world's population living on $1 a day or less, corrected for inflation, the percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day or less in my lifetime has decreased by 80%. 80% decrease in the percentage of the world's population living at starvation level. Okay? Now, how come? You never read about that in the news, but it's the most amazing humanitarian story in the history of the world. Never has poverty been wiped out like this in the history of humanity, and it's happened in my lifetime and part of your lifetime too. It's a miracle. So we got to have an explanation for it. As an economist, I am morally beholden to have an explanation for you right now. If I don't have an explanation for you for that, I'm not doing anything that I should be doing, because that's real lives we're talking about. So let's see. Is it U.S. foreign aid, or the United Nations, or the International Monetary Fund, or central planning? No, 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 no. It's 5 things. 5 things. It's globalization, free trade, property rights, rule of law, and entrepreneurship. It's the American free enterprise system that started to spread around the world after 1970 because of the explosion of communications technologies that helped people in other countries look at you and say, I want that. Now, sometimes they were oppressed by circumstance in their economies, and sometimes they were oppressed by dictators, as in the case of the Soviet Empire. But they threw off those shackles, physical or in terms of leadership, and they became more like us in a very real way, and I've got the numbers to prove it. Globalization, free trade, property rights, rule of law, and entrepreneurship. It was your system that allowed somebody to not go to bed hungry tonight in sub-Saharan Africa in a place you'll never see, have never heard of, and will never visit. It is that system, particularly free trade, that has lifted 662 million Chinese out of starvation-level poverty since 1980. Incredible. It's incredible. And that is the system that is helpful for happiness here and survival there. So what are we going to do for that? That's the real question. That's the moral question. It's not a question of whether or not it's perfect, because we know it's not. It's not a question of whether markets are great all the time, because we know they're not. It's not a question of what sets of policy should be free market or not free market. It's how we're going to fight fundamentally for the system that will allow earned success for everybody, all of our brothers and sisters, including those who are the least of these. That's a true moral quest, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to leave it at that, except I'm going to give two sets of suggestions to you. Number one is personal. Remember the four today. Forget the other stuff. Forget the circumstances. Forget the life events. Forget all that stuff. It's all going to go away. But the four, the big four, you're going to be managing, and they're in your control. Your faith, your family, your community, and your orientation toward meaningful earned success through your work. That's your power. Second is, what are we going to do for public policy? If you want to help other people the most, it doesn't matter if you're a liberal or a moderate or a conservative. It doesn't matter. The free enterprise system lifts people up, and it is our ability through this system to share it as an act of basic stewardship and global brotherhood with the world, which is the reason I'm here today, and the reason I'm really grateful for what you're doing with your careers, with your education, what you're going to do in the world to make it a better place. Thank you very much. All right. Now I'm going to reiterate the microphone thing. This is not because I can't hear you. It's because we're linking up to the camera. And so we need, if you're going to ask a question or make an objection or you want some feedback or something, make sure you do it from that microphone right there. So I want you to come right around the back here. Sorry.
You emphasize the four things that we should keep in mind in searching for happiness. But I think the million-dollar question is, how do you balance all those four things? And in your research, have you seen that people are happier when they prioritize one thing over another at a certain point in their lives or something?
That's a super smart question. Thank you. Faith, family, community, and work. Now, what happens if it's all work and nothing of the rest? And the answer is bad things happen to you. Balance is really important across these things. So what is it, incidentally, I've kind of given away the game already, that people tend to emphasize to the exclusion of the others, particularly you? It's going to be work. You're going to marginalize it. The data show, look, I have the data on you people. I know you. Your faith, your family, and your community tend to get marginalized, particularly in early parts of your career. Don't fall into that. Don't fall into that abyss, because it really does attenuate your happiness to a very great extent. It's very important to have balance across those four things and not to marginalize any of them. That's the reason I said put them all on the list and ask yourself, what am I doing today to invest in each one of those areas today? Thank you.
Okay, I have two questions. The first is, how do we distinguish between meaning and happiness? I think there seems to be a distinction in my mind. For example, children seem to bring meaning, but perhaps not happiness, as you can say as the father of adolescence. So I kind of wonder how you would distinguish between those two. And then the second thing I wanted to ask is, you began your talk by saying that happiness has remained constant across since the 1970s, but obviously at least faith and family have definitely plummeted since the 1970s in a lot of measures. Family stability and religious fervor in America have decreased since then. So how do you explain consistent happiness with decreasing faith and family?
Good. So thank you. Meaning and happiness. Yeah, not the same thing, and very much having to do with time. Okay, so what you find, and kids are you picked out exactly, you've been reading my stuff. Thank you. Actually, I know you haven't. So faith, meaning and happiness, and especially in the case of kids. Let's take the case study of children. When you look at the happiness of a couple, when they have their first child, it plummets. Okay? It continues down until the first child is about 6, then it comes up. It comes up, but that's when the first child goes to school, more or less. And it falls again, and it's at its trough, its absolute trough, the happiness of the couple, when the first child is about 13, right? It starts to rise after that only when the first child is leaving home, okay? So you can have kids further down the value stream, or but when the first child leaves home is when happiness. And if a marriage actually survives the children, you find that it will get happier and happier and happier and happier and happier all the way to death, which is a fantastic thing, right? But what it says is, it makes it look like kids bring misery. They don't. They don't. Kids bring temporal unhappiness because of stress and a great deal of meaning over the long term. So that's what you really find, is that meaning in life is this much longer term sense of it. And if you're studying Aristotle, et cetera, you'll understand some of these non-trivial distinctions that we're talking about here philosophically. That's really important. So meaning is a great thing. There are lots of things that we do to sacrifice that bring apparent unhappiness in the short term that are utterly worth doing. If you talk to an ascetic, if you talk to a Tibetan Buddhist monk, which I've been doing a lot of recently, and what you find is that they have a very good sense of this, very good sense of, you know, how these types of relationships work, and it's an important thing to explore in each of our lives. Now, how do you explain the fact that faith and family seem to be greatly attenuating, but happiness has remained largely constant? Well, actually, faith and family are not really attenuating, is what you find. You just find that family fragmentation is concentrating in one part of the income distribution. So when I was a kid, let's take when I was in elementary school in the 70s, everybody was getting divorced. It was the thing. All of my friends' parents were divorced. I think my parents were the only parents who weren't getting divorced, and they felt sort of out of it. It's like, we still love each other. Don't tell anybody. You know, that kind of thing, right? So now what do you find? Now, and so that's the reason you always hear that statistic that 50% of marriages end in failure, right? That's wrong. That's just like the same lie you hear from economists like me, that the economy is at a slow but stable pace of growth. That's wrong, too. It's all asymmetric. The top part of the economy is growing at 4.5%. The bottom part of the economy is growing at 0. That's why we still have a recession among the poor, but we have really fast growth among the rich in this country. That's a problem, obviously. Same thing is true when you talk about social dysfunction, where you see that in the top 10% of the income distribution, a divorce is something like 15%. And the bottom 20% is more like 75%. That's the reason that we see disproportionate family fragmentation. Cohabitation, incidentally, cohabitation relationships that aren't in marriage have something like a 95% dissolution rate. So, and this is disproportionately happening in the bottom part of the income distribution. So it's being concentrated in there, even though the aggregate looks like it isn't changing very much. Same thing is true of faith. If you talk to people who are involved in traditional congregations, they look at the data and say people are way less religious than they used to be. Not true. They're not as traditionally religious as they used to be, but if you actually look at spirituality, it's relatively constant. There's really good stuff coming from a researcher at Notre Dame named Christian Smith on this. Good news if you're a non-traditional spiritualist, not so good news if you're actually trying to run a Methodist church, which has like 9 people still going to it, right? And so that's kind of, it's basically what we see. People are, the patterns are becoming more asymmetric and less traditional than they used to be. And that's probably what explains the constancy in happiness. Yeah, these are great questions.
Yeah, so one of the things you mentioned that leads to happiness in work, at least, is feeling as if you earn your success. But I'm wondering whether you think people ought to feel as if they earned their success, specifically because you mentioned the influence of genetics on things, and I'm sure like many things happen in our lives that are outside of our control. Like sometimes things succeed and sometimes they don't. So do you feel as if people ought to believe that they earned their success, or to what extent?
I do. Well, we know that when people believe they've earned something, it gives them satisfaction, and when they don't believe they've earned it, it doesn't bring them satisfaction. You can take that to the point where you should say, we should figure out a way for people always to feel like they've earned something, and incidentally, we do. When I was a kid, a lot of my neighbors were on welfare, right? You know what people in the 70s called welfare checks? They called it their salary, right? Why is that? That's the impulse toward needing to earn things. If you go to a retirement facility and explain to the upper middle class retirees that most of them are on Social Security that they didn't earn, you better hope nobody's got a gun, because you're going to pay. You're going to pay in a big way. I earned that. You know, I earned that fair and square. You say, well, I look at the tables and the actuarial tables, and I can see you didn't pay in nearly as much as you're taking out. It doesn't matter. People need to feel like they've actually earned these things. And the greatest thing that we can do is help people earn things more. So that's the reason, incidentally. And this is a public policy thing that we're doing a lot of at AEI. We have with the State of the Union address coming up January 28th, I know you're all going to tune in. One of the things that the president is going to propose is a minimum wage increase, right? Now, the problem with the minimum wage in this country is not that it's going to hurt businesses. That's not the problem. The problem is it has an asymmetric impact on the workforce. It's a wage increase for my teenage kids, and it's a job-destroying mechanism for the people who have really tenuous grasp on the workforce. That's the problem with the minimum wage. We want to find a better way to make sure that work pays, so that people earn it. What's the best way to do it? It's called a wage subsidy, so that businesses don't have to pay for it and destroy jobs as a result, but rather the whole community pays for it out of taxes, and we top up people's wages to what we think actually is fair, and then they feel like they've earned it, and that makes a much, much healthier sociological environment around work. So that's one of the things that we can actually do through public policy. Have any more questions? Come on, somebody's got to, something you didn't like, okay?
Okay, thanks. So this is slightly anecdotal, but I feel like I've also read some research on it. But I've heard that Americans, for the most part, their profession corresponds to their self-identity.
Mm-hmm.
So what they kind of believe in their self-worth is tied to what they do for a living, and
Right.
the money is kind of supplemental as a result. However, I have, in other parts of the world, for example, in Italy, I've spoken to a lot of native Italians who say that what they do for a living, they don't necessarily correspond to their identity and their self-worth, but it's a way to sustain themselves monetarily so that they can then do the things that they want to do that derive their happiness in life. So do you see kind of a cross-cultural difference between the four tenets that you've spoken of, if like one has more weight in one society over another?
That's good. I love that question. I think about that a lot because I'm married to a Spaniard, and you know, and it's sort of a running conversation in our household that Americans live to work and Europeans work to live, right? And that's basically that they say that all the time, right? That's true, probably. I mean, the truth of the matter is I can't, because I have American data, I've been studying this on Americans, I don't know if I went to France what the weights on faith, family, community, and work would be. And I wouldn't feel comfortable going to Sweden and saying all these, you know, where apparently happiness has to do with the quality of public transportation or something, you know, and they all retire at age like 29. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm in a position to say to the Swedes, look, you guys, faith, family, community, and work. Why not? Why not? Why might there be big differences? This wonderfully interesting body of literature that's emerging that talks about genetic differences in the proclivity to be entrepreneurial, and that varies systematically with respect to the percentage of immigrants in the population. Wild stuff, right? The bottom line from this literature is if you like America to still be a really entrepreneurial, vital, earn success type of place, you better keep open borders because you need lots and lots of immigrants to keep fertilizing this pool of people who are coming here who have effectively a mutation on their genome for risk-taking and adventure, but which becomes the norm for every single one of you because either you're an immigrant or you're from immigrants. That's a very interesting thing, and I haven't assessed it empirically or actually looked in, I'm not an expert on the science of that, but what that suggests is that different people or different populations, even very related. Actually, you know, when it comes down to it, everybody's genetically related. You may or may not know that the entire human race has less genetic variation than one troop of chimpanzees, and for a lot of historic reasons. I mean, there's a very little genetic variation between people, but we blow up these minor differences, and these minor differences might actually be systematic with respect to entrepreneurship, in which case, I don't know what I'm going to tell the Italians. I will tell you, incidentally, that the Italians have been one of only 2 countries in Western Europe that's seen systematically declining happiness over the past 25 years. And you know, I've written about that in the Italian newspapers just to make enemies. But because you know, when I don't have enough controversy in my life, then I'll just write for a European newspaper. And I'm just as interested to hear your speculation on that as well. Thank you.
I'm curious about the 2 public policy solutions that you commented on with respect to your earned success thesis. The first being a minimum wage increase, and the second being some sort of income credit that tops up people's income to a minimum level. On one hand, the way that I would interpret these 2 would be that a minimum wage places a valuation on the work that people are already doing, hence not necessarily giving them something unearned, whereas a income top-up paid through a redistributive tax might have negative property rights ramifications, which you mentioned earlier as being very important to individuals' happiness. I'm wondering whether you can reconcile these, or at least perhaps elaborate on these public policy positions and how they exactly fit into the earned happiness thesis.
Well, the minimum wage, the basic problem with it, is that it has supply and demand implications that lead to, anytime you have a wage ceiling or a wage floor, it actually creates dislocations in markets and destroys, I mean, it has deleterious impacts on the amount of jobs available, is what it comes down to. Because basically the valuation is being changed systematically and forced upon employers in such a way that they create fewer jobs or they destroy jobs. So that's the basic problem. The problem is not how much people are being paid, because I agree that you can't make a living. I mean, you can't support a family on minimum wage. So all we're doing at this point is trying to find a better way to do that in a way that doesn't have the negative implications for the number of jobs that will be destroyed or not created in a very real case. And the way that you do that is actually, if we have a societal determination that somebody should earn a certain amount per hour that is necessary such that they can support their family, that we do that as a project by our society as well. It shouldn't have really bad property rights implications, because what we're saying effectively is that will come out, those who keep their jobs, which will say everybody under that policy, will have, and it'll be more expensive than a minimum wage, by the way, and it'll be expensive to us, which means if we're serious about this, it's not okay just to vote for a politician and then slough off the cost onto a firm. It's basically saying if we believe in it, we're going to pay for it, which seems like a kind of a democratic and decent thing to do, in my opinion. And it also won't destroy the jobs at the very bottom, and it will get them to the same level of income that we actually wanted, because we thought societally that's where we should be. And it probably, my guess is that it won't have any effect on the incentives of the people at all. It'll have less of an impact on the incentives of the workers themselves than most of the policies that we would engage in. So I think that it's a pretty good way to pass through our values into our policies if we're serious about it. Now the problem is, once you do that, we're going to see that people aren't as serious as they thought they were. People are really generous with other people's money, incredibly generous with other people's money. And that's exactly the kind of policies that we do. When the president says, those companies, those rotten companies, they should be paying more, that's somebody else's money. When he says, let's have a wage subsidy or an increase or a general increase in the earned income tax credit, expansion of the earned income tax credit, then he's saying, actually, I'm talking about your money, voters. And we'll see, the kind of courage that the politicians have at that point. But I think it's the right thing to do. It's a better policy economically. We have plenty. Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right. I have two questions. The first is a question of statistics.
Yeah.
And the second is more related to your speech. So earlier you asserted that, no, you didn't assert. You stated that global poverty has been down. The number of people living on $1 a day has been going down over the past few decades. I was wondering whether this was evenly across the board, across all countries, or whether it was more concentrated in some areas than in others. Because we do know that 1991, Soviet Union falls, and as a result, it makes sense that a lot of
So the distribution of people living on $1 a day or less is not even across the world. I really, really wish it were. You find that the places where it's gone down the most, not the former Soviet countries, because they weren't that poor. You find it's in places, for example, South America, China, Indonesia, certain pockets of sub-Saharan Africa. That's where you see it. And what do they have in common? Those are the countries that have democratized. Those are the countries that have actually let people, that have not forced the sort of the collar of central planning onto people. Rather, it's let people grab at this aspiration that they've actually been able to see. That's the reason that the democracy of ideas and the democracy of free enterprise is so critically important. And anybody who says that certain regions of the world can't do it isn't paying attention. There's a reason. I mean, you go back to the early 1990s, the country that would never recover and have prosperity ever again was Rwanda. The worst, most miserable country in the world is Rwanda. Rwanda is an unbelievable success story. You want to invest your money in sub-Saharan Africa, put it in Rwanda. It's just growing like crazy. It has double-digit growth rates, and it has a thriving civil society, and it's fantastic especially compared to what it was. Why is that? It's because of good leadership and the democratization of free enterprise values. The Republic of Georgia is the best example of the former Soviet Empire. Indonesia is unbelievable what it's doing today. It's the next big success story of Asia, and they all have this kind of thing in common. I wish it were more uniform than it is. It's not enough.
And then, sorry, then the second question is, why does happiness matter? Like, is there like, I mean, avoiding the philosophy, like more to social science, like, is there like do happier societies like tend to thrive better in terms of like economics or politics or like what is the like real world implications of
That is an incredibly smart question. Why does happiness matter? There's just not enough time to answer that question because it's not straightforward. I mean, you could say because happiness is better because then people are happier, but you know what, I just kind of went in a circle at that point, right? That's not, and you're not going to accept that because you know that it doesn't make logical sense. Why does happiness matter? It depends. I mean, if you talk to people who are very, very Christian, they'll give you a theological explanation for it, or Jewish. They'll give you a theological explanation for it. If you talk to an economist who only cares about efficiency, he'll say happier populations have higher GDP growth. Yet, that's not, obviously, I mean, it seems obvious to me that that's a materialist explanation that we should reject on its face. Maybe you just look into your own soul and say, I want to be happier, and I want other people to be happier as well. So as a basic ethical truism, we want a happier society. Yet at the same time, there's pretty interesting research that I've seen that suggests that melancholic people are the people most likely to change the world for the better. Huh. You don't say, get me a new phlegmatic leader. You know, nobody says that. You know, it's like, get me somebody who is happy and has very little personality. No. You see, you know, people who question the status quo and are chronically unsatisfied. And entrepreneurs tend to be pretty melancholic, as a matter of fact. So that's a very deep question. It's a very smart question. I don't have as good an answer for you as I wish I did. Thank you. We have time for one last one. That's you.
Great. Right. So I wanted to ask about work, and you know, because I'm an American, and I'm probably going to spend an inordinate amount of time in my life focusing on work. And I think one of the standby pieces of advice that we're consistently bombarded with is follow your passion. You yourself said, find what you love, and we'll, you know, try to make some work out of that. But I'm curious because I feel like, isn't your own lived experience kind of a refutation of that hypothesis? Because you followed your passion, you played music. I know a lot of people who would, you know, give their left arm to play music for the rest of their life. But you went off and did something different. Does that mean that the follow your passion hypothesis is more complicated, is actually more complicated in real life, or is it something we need to throw out altogether?
Great question. So, and I've contemplated that. And the latter answer is correct. Follow your passion is a complicated thing. Let me tell you how I think I figured it out. Okay, so the book I'm writing, I told you a little bit about poverty. It has a whole section about it, about successful causes, people, and organizations. They're the ones that are purpose-driven. Right? Now, when I was in music, my favorite composer is the same as the favorite composer of a bunch of you right now, which is Johann Sebastian Bach. Probably the most famous, today, the most famous so-called classical composer who's ever lived. Now, I mean, the guy was unbelievable. I mean, it was so productive. He had 200 cantatas for orchestra and chorus that just sort of fell off his pen. Talk about productive. He had 20 kids. That's productive, right? It's it's incredible, the stuff that he did. And it was beautiful, and it was inspirational. And when I was in music and I was just leaving to become an economist, I was reading about Bach's life. And he was asked, you know, at the end of his life, he wasn't super famous at the end of his life. He was only made famous by another great composer named Felix Mendelssohn, who 100 years after his death figured out that Bach was this great genius and popularized his music. Mendelssohn's greatest contribution to the canon is making Bach famous, interestingly. I mean, that's stewardship. And when Bach was asked at the end of his life to reflect on his life, and he was asked this question, he said, why do you write music? This is going to give the conjunction of skills and passions, right? And what would he have said if he was alive in 2014? What would you be encouraged by society to say? You'd be encouraged to say, it's something that I'm truly inspired by, and some story about when you were a kid. Or you'd say something, right? I mean, that's a really, really kind of feeling your deepest feelings and expressing them to total strangers. I mean, that's what society is asking you to do all the time, right? That's, that's Twitter. And you would have said something in 140 characters that sounded sort of pithy and that was really personal. Or you would have said something really practical. Bach would have said something like, it's a living. Why do you write music? It's a living. I'm good at it. Pays the rent. I got 20 kids. Right? What did he say? He said this. Bach was a serious Lutheran. Okay? That was his children and his faith, family, I don't know about his community, work. Bach said this, I write music for the enjoyment of man and the glory of God. That was his answer. That was it. Now, and I thought to myself, if I can get to the end of my life doing whatever I'm doing, whether I'm playing the French horn or being a college professor, God bless you, which I thought I wanted to do at that time, and I did for a long time, or I didn't even think about running a think tank in those days, or who knows what's going to be going on in 10 years. If I can get to the end of my life and say, I did what I did for the good of men and women and the glory of God, I'll be happy. Because that really is the conjunction of my skills and my passions. That's where I think that your passions really lie, is in the service of things that are more important than you. That's my view, that's when people really can be who they're intended to be as people, is when they're serving others, when they're serving things that are greater than themselves. It's a good place to leave it. Thank you.